This is Sable Island, a crescent of sand 43 kilometres long and barely 1 wide, rising out of the North Atlantic 300 kilometres from the nearest city, with nothing between it and Europe but water. More people have died in shipwrecks here than have ever been born on its sand. The fog sits for 127 days a year. Ships have been dying on these bars since 1583, some 350 of them, and sailors gave the place the name that stuck, the graveyard of the Atlantic. And yet 500 horses run here with no fence, no owner and no one to feed them. Hundreds of thousands of grey seals come every winter to give birth. And a handful of humans, 6 in the depth of winter, stay just long enough to count the horses and go home. Only 2 children have been born on this island since 1920. So if this sandbar has swallowed 350 ships, if it is fog and wind and shifting dune, if the government itself will only let you land with written permission, why do the horses thrive here? Why do the seals come? And why does a handful of people every year ask to be sent to a place that has spent 4 centuries trying to disappear? Sail southeast from Halifax, Nova Scotia, for about 300 kilometres, out past the fishing banks and into the open Atlantic, and you will find, if the fog lets you, a thin line of sand on the horizon. That is all Sable Island is, a sandbar shaped like a bent bow, roughly 43 kilometres from tip to tip, and only about 1.2 kilometres across at its widest. Its highest dune stands about 30 metres above the sea. Its total area is around 34 square kilometres, and much of that is beach. It has no rock, no trees to speak of, no harbour. It is made almost entirely of sand and marram grass, held in place by roots and luck, and it moves, the dunes migrate with the wind, the ends of the island advance and retreat with the currents, and the shape on last century's charts is not quite the shape today. The nearest point of mainland Nova Scotia is about 175 kilometres away. There is no ferry, no scheduled flight, no dock. Visitors arrive by small aircraft landing on the beach at low tide, or by boat when the sea permits, and every one of them, including recreational sailors passing by, needs specific permission from Parks Canada to set foot on the island. The weather is the island's second name. Sable Island lies where the cold Labrador Current meets the warm Gulf Stream, and where those two meet, fog is born. It is the foggiest place in the maritime provinces, wrapped in cloud an average of 127 days a year. The wind is constant. Storms, the Atlantic's ordinary storms and the tail ends of hurricanes, cross it with nothing to slow them down. And it lies exactly where ships did not want it to be, on the great circle route between Europe and the American ports, low, unlit for centuries, and surrounded by shifting bars that a captain could not see until he was already on them. That is why the sand is full of ships. And that is why, in 1801, someone finally decided a few people should live here. The first recorded wreck was an English ship called the Delight, lost in 1583. She would not be the last. Over the following centuries, the sandbars claimed vessel after vessel, an estimated 350 in all, until the name Graveyard of the Atlantic was less a nickname than a warning printed on the charts. The horses are part of that history, though not the way legend tells it. The romantic story has them swimming ashore from a wreck. The likelier one is drier and sadder. They were confiscated from the Acadians during the Great Expulsion of the 1750s, when the French-speaking settlers of Nova Scotia were forcibly deported and left on the island by a Boston merchant named Thomas Hancock. The Acadians lost their land and their animals. The animals, in a strange twist, got an island. The horses have not always been left alone. Before 1960, roundups periodically took animals off the island for sale as workhorses, and, in the last decades of the practice, for meat and pet food. When plans for a large removal became public in the late 1950s, the outcry was national. Canadian schoolchildren wrote to the Prime Minister asking that the horses be spared, and in 1960 the government amended the Canada Shipping Act to declare them fully protected. Since then, it has been an offence to interfere with, feed, or remove them without written permission. In 1801, the governor of Nova Scotia, John Wentworth, established a lifesaving station on Sable Island. Its first superintendent, James Morris, settled there that October with a small crew and a simple mandate: watch the sea, and when a ship struck, go out and bring the people back alive. For more than a century and a half, that was the island's reason to have residents. Families lived here. Children were raised in the life-saving stations. Horses were used to haul the boats and patrol the beach. Science came too. From 1891, the island kept a continuous meteorological record, one of the longest in Canada, as a weather station in the middle of the shipping lanes. That record ran unbroken until August 20th, 2019, when the upper air program ended. By the 20th century, the wrecks grew rarer, better charts, better lights, better engines, and in 1958 the life-saving station closed for good. The horses stayed. In 1960 they were placed under legal protection, and the government made a decision that would shape the island's future. The animals would not be managed, fed, or removed. They would be left wild. Then, on June 20th, 2013, Sable Island became a national park reserve, with the island and the water around it protected from oil and gas drilling to a distance of 1 nautical mile. The full national park designation still waits on the settlement of indigenous land claims, but the meaning was already clear after 400 years of being a place ships feared. Sable Island had become a place the country wanted to keep exactly as it was, which raises the question no map can answer: what does it take to actually live there? The honest population of Sable Island is 0. No one is a permanent resident. What the island has instead is a rotating human presence: Parks Canada staff and the researchers who come to study the horses, the seals, the birds. And the weather, that swells to a couple of dozen people in summer and shrinks to a handful in the depth of winter. 6 to 25 depending on the season. 6 is the number that matters, because 6 is what the island comes down to when the storms close in. They live at the station on the island's north side, a small cluster of buildings, fuel and water storage, generators, workshops, and the equipment that keeps a place like this alive, because nothing on Sable Island is connected to anything. There is no cable to the mainland. There is no pipe. Every litre of fuel arrives by boat or plane. Every repair is done by whoever is there. A season on Sable Island begins with a checklist and a wait. Fuel, food, spare parts, the instruments, everything for months, because the next chance to bring more may be weeks away. Then the flight, or the boat, and the first walk up the beach past the seals and the wreck's bones to a station that has been keeping the same records, in one form or another, since 1801. The staff who come here describe the arrival the same way: the noise of the surf, the smell of the seals, the horses watching from the dune, and the sudden understanding that for the foreseeable future this is the whole world. Getting there is the first job. Aircraft land on the beach, on the hard-packed sand below the tide line, and only when wind, fog, and surf allow. A scheduled arrival can slip by a day, or 3, or a week. People who work here learn to pack for longer than they plan to stay. The work is the island itself, counting horses, an annual census that tracks the wild population, its foals, its deaths, its bands. Monitoring the seals, the largest grey seal colony on Earth, whose pupping season in winter turns the beaches into a nursery of tens of thousands of animals. Recording weather, tracking erosion, studying the birds. Sable Island is one of the most intensively observed patches of sand in the world, and the observers are the only humans on it. There is a discipline to it. You do not feed the horses. You do not approach the seals. You walk where the island lets you walk, and you leave nothing. The rule for visitors, permission required, footprints only, applies to the residents too. The people who live on Sable Island live there as guests of the animals, and there is the number that says everything about what kind of place this is. Since 1920, only 2 people have been born here. Sable Island is not a place where humans make a life. It is a place where humans keep watch. The horses, meanwhile, make a life. And they make it well. The Sable Island horses are the island's real citizens. Around 500 to 550 of them, by the last estimates, small, shaggy, thick-maned animals that live in family bands across the dunes. They eat marram grass. They dig in the sand for fresh water where the rain collects beneath the surface. They are born, they fight, they die, and they are buried by nothing but the wind. No one feeds them. No one treats them. No one has since 1960 been allowed to interfere. That makes them one of the very few truly wild horse populations left on Earth, not feral animals on the edge of a ranch, but a herd that has answered only to weather and grass for 2.5 centuries. Their ancestors were confiscated from deported farmers. Their descendants have outlasted the lifesaving station, the weather station, and every human institution the island has ever hosted. They are small, 13 to 14 hands, the size of a large pony, stallions around 360 kilograms and mares around 300, stocky and short-legged, most of them bay, some chestnut or black. Many with the natural ambling gait their Acadian ancestors were bred for. They live in family bands led by a stallion with bachelor groups on the margins, and they dig for fresh water in the sand where the rain collects. In 2008, Nova Scotia named the Sable Island horse its official provincial horse, a legal honour for an animal that has never had a legal owner. If the horses are the culture of Sable Island, its ceremonies are the seasons. Winter is the seals, grey seals hauling out by the hundreds of thousands to give birth on the beaches, in numbers that have exploded from a couple of hundred pups a year in the 1960s to some 87,500 in 2016. For a few weeks the island is not a graveyard at all. It is one of the largest maternity wards in the animal kingdom. The seals define the winter as completely as the horses define the rest of the year. From December into February, the beaches disappear under grey seal mothers and their white-coated pups, a colony that has grown from a few hundred births a year in the 1960s to tens of thousands. And the island's human residents keep their distance and count. Then the pups molt, the adults return to the sea, and the sand is empty again until the next winter. It is one of the largest gatherings of large mammals on the North American coast, and it happens on an island that 6 people are watching. Spring and summer belong to the birds, the Ipswich sparrow that nests almost nowhere else, the terns, the gulls, and to the researchers who arrive with them. Autumn brings the storms, and the storms bring, still, the occasional reminder of why the island earned its name, the ribs of old wrecks surfacing from the sand and vanishing again as the dunes move. For the humans, culture is what you carry in. Books, music, the habits of a small crew that will see the same faces for months, meals together, weather as the daily conversation, and a peculiar pride that anyone who has spent a winter on Sable Island seems to share, the pride of having been allowed, briefly, to be part of a place that does not need people at all. That is the strangest thing about the island. It is not lonely, it is simply not about us. Sable Island exists because of currents. Sand carried by the sea gathered on a shallow bank far offshore and, over thousands of years, rose above the surface into a bar that plants could hold. The same currents keep reshaping it, the Labrador current from the north, the Gulf Stream from the south, meeting exactly here and manufacturing the fog that hides the island from the ships it wrecks. The island's endemic bird is the Ipswich sparrow, a pale subspecies of the savanna sparrow that breeds almost nowhere else on Earth and winters on the beaches of the eastern United States, a small brown reason, alongside the horses and the seals, that scientists have watched Sable Island for so long. Everything on it is adapted to sand and salt and wind. Marram grass whose roots knit the dunes together, freshwater ponds that form between the dune ridges and give the horses their water, cranberries and beach pea. The Ipswich sparrow. And, offshore, the reason the seals come, cold, rich water thick with fish. Yet the island's greatest natural feature may be the one you cannot see. Beneath and around it lie the sandbars, the shifting submerged shoals that extend far out from both tips, and that, for 4 centuries, turned an ordinary crossing into a catastrophe. The island you can see is a fraction of the island that ships must avoid. The scientists who winter here measure all of it. They have watched the seal colony grow into the world's largest. They have counted the horses through good years and hard ones. And they have watched the sand, because a place made of sand in a rising ocean has a particular relationship with time. Sable Island is a low sandbar, and low sandbars are what the sea takes first. Its highest point is 30 metres, most of it is far lower. Its shape has always shifted, but the concern now is not shape, it is existence. Some projections suggest the island could be largely gone by the end of this century, its sand redistributed by rising water and stronger storms. The horses' numbers move with the weather. Roughly 300 were counted in the 1970s. Since 2009, the population has swung between about 400 and 550. In an ordinary year, about 1 horse in 100 dies. In the harsh spring of 2017, the mortality reached 10%. A bad winter, a late thaw, and dozens of animals lost on an island where no one may feed them. A 2019 study found parasite loads 3 times those of domestic horses, along with sand-worn teeth and blocked guts from the diet of grass and grit. Wildness is not the same as ease. For the horses, that is an eventual question. The immediate ones are harsher winters, harder foaling seasons, and the simple fact that a wild population with no management is a population that must survive every bad year on its own. It has, so far. There is no guarantee written into the sand. For the humans, the challenge is the same as it has always been: distance and weather, supplies delayed by fog, flights that cannot land, medical emergencies that are 300 kilometres from a hospital with no fast way to close the gap, a crew that must be able to fix a generator, treat an injury, and wait out a storm with the same 6 pairs of hands. And there is the tension every protected place lives with. The world wants to see it. Sable Island's fame, the horses, the seals, the wrecks, brings pressure to visit, to film, to land. Parks Canada holds the line with permits and rules, because the island's whole value lies in being left alone. Every visitor is a decision. The National Park Reserve status protects the sand from drilling and the horses from interference. It cannot protect the island from the ocean that made it. In the long run, Sable Island is a place that will change on its own schedule, and the people who love it have already accepted the terms. You may watch, you may count, you may keep the records. You may not decide. Which is, in the end, why they keep going back. Picture the island at first light in January. Fog on the water. A wind that has crossed the whole Atlantic to get here. On the beach, tens of thousands of grey seals and their white pups. Up on the dunes, a band of horses with their backs to the weather, as their ancestors have stood for 250 winters. And at the station, a light in one window, 5 or 6 people, up early, checking the instruments, counting what can be counted, writing it down. For 400 years this sandbar was the place ships feared. Then it was the place from which people rowed out to save them. Now it is the place a country has decided to protect precisely by leaving it alone, with a handful of humans as witnesses, not owners. Sable Island is not just a sandbar. It is a reminder that some places are kept alive by the few who agree to be temporary, and that the deepest form of belonging is sometimes to keep watch over something that was never yours.